everybody. I'm Kitty Sookochoff. I was born and raised here on a farm. Moved away for about 30 years, and I've been back for about 20, which probably says something about a little more than that. So it's interesting, the turnout today, as opposed to the last couple of years, because we're not here yet, but you know, we're not really into the growing mode. And just pulling this presentation together got me really planting things. But I was thinking about it, so we're talking in February instead of March, and that gives us some different opportunities that we wouldn't have if we were starting in March. And I'll mention a few of those as we go through, but February is a great time if you're starting onions, leeks, things like that from seed, to start them early. Some of the annuals that you can be thinking about starting in February are, I made a list here because I was thinking about it in bed last night actually. Pansies, violas, wax begonias, lobelias, petunias, snapdragons. And the snaps, because they can go in very early, they can go in well before the last frost, or the last frost in the spring. It's also a perfect time to start a lot of perennials. And a lot of us are leery about starting perennials because they're tougher to start in a lot of cases than annuals. They take longer to germinate, and we'll touch on some of this as I'm talking. But some of the perennials that are easy to start and that you could be starting right now are things like coreopsis, dianthus, which is like pinks, the old-fashioned pinks, catmint, heliopsis, which is one of my favorites to start and plant and get going, although it can be a little bit invasive. It's a great native, a really good pollinator. Blanket flower, giardia, anise hyssop, which is wonderful for the pollinators, and it's real easy to start. It takes a while to get going, but then once it gets going, it is just a great plant to grow. Yarrow. Yarrow is really interesting, either the native yarrows, or you can start the, I don't know how many of you have been looking through the seed catalogs, but there's so many interesting varieties of yarrow right now, and some that are much more colorful. We think of yarrow as being that yellow flower, but there's so many different colors and different cultivars that you can have there. Rebeckias, the black-eyed Susans, and again, there's a lot of different varieties. And one of my favorites right now is Triloba, and I don't know if you guys have seen Triloba, but it's kind of a branching Rebeckia that starts really easy, grows really fast. It's a really hardy perennial, and it's big, you know, it's like huge. What else do I have on my list? Columbine, and of course the echinaceas. So several of those are natives, and the native echinaceas are great, and it's a good time to start them. And again, there's a lot of new cultivars out there. There's a lot of different colored echinaceas right now. And I was just going to say, definitely in a lot of these, you know, you may want to look at the native varieties because they're probably easier access for a lot of the pollinators that we're trying to help. But you can certainly look at some of the new different colors, and it adds interest to your gardens. The other thing in February, and this stuff isn't part of my little slideshow, so I'll cover some of it right now. Somebody during the meeting earlier was talking about winter sowing. And this is the easy, if you feel like planting things right now, this is just the easiest thing to do. Or if you're working with kids or grandkids, it's just a great thing to do with your grandkids. And all it requires is a milk jug or a tray or something, and about 3 inches of germ mix in the bottom, germination mix, well moistened. Put your seeds in, put it outside. Well, you need ventilation holes and drainage holes in the bottom, and just duct tape it shut. Just take your milk carton, cut it 3/4 of the way around so you have a hinge, and then you can plant it, tape it closed with some duct tape, and put it outside. And watch for it to germinate. And this kind of relates to what you were saying earlier in the meeting about your greenhouse, and you get those temperature fluctuations. There are certain plants that need that in order to break the casing on the seed and germinate, and a lot of our natives are like that. And there's tons of information online about that. This happens to hold cardinal flowers, thank you, Pat, and which I got from my friend and neighbor from her cardinals last year, and we'll see how they do in here. I've got several of these going right now. So in winter, the other thing you can do right now, this is winter sowing, so it's sort of in a controlled environment. You can also do winter seeding, where you're just basically throwing seed out on the snow. And that can be very effective with some natives too, and that's where some of the other cardinal flowers are. I just threw them out on the snow in areas where I think they should do well if they germinate. So February, it's not all bad. And I think, is there anybody in here that's never grown a seed in their life? Okay, awesome. But everybody else has done some. Who would say they think they're a really experienced grower from seeds? Okay, so feel free to chime in. I clearly don't have all the answers. We'll go through some of the basics, we'll have some conversation, and try and get through this in a fairly timely fashion, because I know Marianne wants to talk about the seed library and have a seed exchange when we're done here. That's why I decided this year that maybe a PowerPoint would help us stay a little bit more on task, so we'll try that. Seed starting 101. And on our agenda, we're going to talk about why start your own seeds, selecting your seeds, factors that affect germination, give you kind of a step-by-step guide to seed starting, talk a little bit about troubleshooting and things that can go wrong, and then eventually get to transplanting and hardening off. Yeah, do we want it, is that hard to see? Yeah. We can turn off the overhead lights all day if we moved on it. I don't know. There's something there. There's some right over there. Oh, yeah, that is promising. Yeah, that helps.
Just
Does that help?
there.
So go ahead and do them all if you want.
There.
Okay, good, thanks for catching that one. Why start your own seeds? Clearly it's a way to start money. Anybody who's bought flats of seedlings in recent years knows that it's not cheap. You get a much better selection, and this isn't the fault of the local nurseries, but they can grow just so many things. And you get into the depths of the seed catalogs or online sites, and the varieties just seem limitless. There's so much out there that you can do. And then the last two kind of go together, and the reason I love starting seeds is just the self-satisfaction that comes out of it. You know, you start with this little inert thing in a package, and you nurture it along to something that's giving you great tomatoes or a beautiful perennial garden. And my native garden at home, I've started almost 100% of the plants in it from seed. And over the last 5 or 6 years. And there's just so much satisfaction in that. So, and of course, it helps make spring arrive earlier if we start growing things. So selecting seeds, and we'll go through some of this pretty quickly because most of you know what it's all about. But start with a reliable seed source. And seed catalogs, and somebody was asking about where do you order your seeds? And we probably all have our favorites. And there's certain seed companies that we may choose for one thing or another. And for me, I order a lot from Johnny's. And all of these seed companies also have online sites that you can go to. I noticed somebody brought a Fedco catalog and a Totally Tomatoes catalog, and I'll put them back there. I assume they're for somebody to pick up. Fedco's been around forever. It's great, basic stuff, and nothing fancy. You won't get a whole bunch of colored pictures, but they've got a lot of good things.
A lot of the information.
There is a lot. I was just going to say that. Some of these catalogs, like this one, I don't know if I brought a Baker Creek in or not. there's all kinds of information in these catalogs. So they're worth just sitting and going through.
Can I say something about Fedco?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a co-op out of Maine. I believe the tree and one out by the seed thing, they have potatoes and stuff in it. They're known for not having GMOs. They have regular, they have a lot of organics. Here, yes, it's paper, but they tell you how to do stuff, how to plant things, how to trim trees, all those things in their catalogs. So they're really helpful, and they also have a section in the one with the vegetables where they have books that you can order, supplies you can order. And I get a lot of my trees from them in my garden. And so they're very, very known for what they do. And so...
And very competitive pricing as well.
Yeah, and if you go online, you can see these things in color.
Yeah. Some of the catalogs specialize in heritage heirloom or open pollinators.
Yeah.
And this is, Baker Creek is certainly one of them that does that. The catalog that I really like for flowers, that is very much the same way, and all plants with a history, mostly flowers with a history, is Select Seeds. And I didn't grab one of their catalogs when I came in. But Select Seeds is great. Their website is good too. And it gives you, we're going to talk about, well, I won't now because I'll talk about it now and skip over it. But open pollinators versus hybrids, and the open pollinator seeds versus heirloom seeds. And they're essentially the same thing, but the heirlooms have a story. And a lot of these, they trace these seeds back to the 1700s, the 1800s. And Select Seeds, as you go through their catalog, will tell you, where this was first propagated and where it came from, or that, someone brought it in from Italy in the 1800s for a tomato seed. So, I mean, it's great getting that kind of information. There's certainly specialty catalogs out there, and I noticed probably you, because it was with the Fedco, brought in the Totally Tomato catalog. I don't typically order from this, but I have. If I've been looking for something, they've got tomatoes and peppers, a few other things, but they really specialize in their tomatoes. So you can get the specialty catalogs as well. This is one of my all-time favorites, because I do grow a lot of natives. And it's Prairie Moon Nursery, and it's right across the border in Minnesota. And this is just an amazing, amazing seed source for natives. And if you go on their website, well, I was talking about the information that you can get on some of these websites. You can print off PDFs on their website that give you just detailed information on propagating anything that they sell. And they've got a lot more on their website than they have in the catalog, but that's another great company. Who am I forgetting? Anybody have any other favorite catalogs? Jumps, of course, is
I didn't
Wisconsin.
catch the name of that one.
Prairie Moon.
Oh, okay.
And you ordered from them?
Prairie Moon, oh yeah. So they're very good. And if you happen to be like repopulating the prairie or something like that, they've got bulk seeds that you can get, and you can also get starts from them. Junk seed, of course, is Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So Randolph, Wisconsin, close by. So that's another one that I periodically order from. So the local nurseries do have seeds to a certain extent, but a lot of times they're not open until later. I mean, Hanson's right now has a seed rack up with a few things on it, but not a ton, and they won't have for quite a while. So a lot of times up here, our best resort is the seed catalogs or online ordering. I would caution you about just if you see a good deal on some seeds on Amazon, watch it. I mean, there's probably some good stuff on there, but make sure that they are things we want to grow in our area, and that they come from a reliable seed source.
When you order seeds, are we considered zone 3 or 4, or both?
We are 4. We're 4A now. There was rezoning a few years ago. And actually, let's get, I thought this would help me from getting off on tangents. We're doing it anyway. Okay. We covered the first 3 of those. The 4th one, properly stored saved seed. You may have seeds left from last year or whatever, or your aunt says, oh, I've got all these seeds left from, 1987, do you want them? So there's things to remember. Different seeds have different viability. So, I've planted seeds, and, Mary Ann and I have, for
There's
their
a chart on top of the seed library with, that you probably could copy if you wanted, with the viability of different seeds.
Yeah. And some, it's very short viability. I plant a fair amount of indigo. Indigo seed, it doesn't last longer than a year. And there are other things that are the same.
Parsnips.
Parsnips are another one that are like a year. So, when you're buying seed, try not to get like a 5-year supply. If you store it, in a nice, cool, dry environment, some of those seeds are going to be good. But, don't count on it. You're better off ordering smaller amounts at a time. You can do, and I think I've demonstrated this in past talks, you can test seeds for their viability. And if you've got some old seeds and you wonder, is it worth, the germination mix and the time and effort of planting them, just take a few, put them in a piece of paper towel or old newspaper, wet it, put it somewhere in the dark for 4 or 5 days or a week, and just see what kind of germination you get. And if you're not getting it, toss the seeds, give it to the birds.
What about some of them that we're told to kind of track, because they're a tough seed?
Yep, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit when we get to water, but we can do it right now. There are certain seeds, and things like nasturtium seeds, sweet peas, things like that. It's hard to get through to break down that seed casing. And sometimes with those, you can take a file, you can soak them in water. The most important thing when you're planting things is to read the packet, read the seed packet. There's so much information on that about so many things. And you'll hear me say read the seed packet umpteen times as I'm talking today. But that'll give you ideas, and that you're absolutely right. So, all right, I have my trusty little thing here. If you're saving seeds, know the difference. Everybody clear on open pollinator versus hybrid? If you've got hybrid seeds, if you've got a hybrid plant, don't bother saving the seeds unless you really want a science experiment, because you could end up with anything. So you're really, there's a place for both of them. Hybrids tend to be much more consistent in their yield, and a lot of times they're tougher in terms of not getting disease, not getting certain funguses, things like that. A lot of times the yield is better, but if you're going to save the seeds, make sure they're open pollinated. And with the open pollinators, and I pointed out the difference, I think, between the heirloom and the open pollinators, but the open pollinators have a fair amount of genetic diversity, like individual differences between the plants when you're planting them. So if you want to save the seeds, look for the characteristics that you want to keep and have in the next year's seeds. So was it the earliest plant? Did it have the most tomatoes? Did everything else in your garden drop of late blight and it's still going strong? Those are the seeds that you want to keep. So selecting the right seeds for our area. So with annuals and garden seeds, you want to check the days to maturity. And the seed packet may say matures in 120 days. What does that mean? So basically we know, and Noah establishes this for us, that our average last frost date is May 30th, and I checked, they haven't changed it. And our average first frost in the fall is, I think, September 15th. 18th, okay. September 18th. So that's 110 days. So we've got a 110-day growing season. But there's a couple things to remember about that. That's the average. That means there's a 30% chance that that last frost could come, you know, well after that time. The first frost in the fall could come well before that time. So you've got to, you know, take it and accept it and apply it, but, you know, cut your bets with maybe planting some a little earlier, saving some for a little later, and the same in the fall. You know, just not take it as absolute gospel. And the other thing about the growing season is that doesn't mean from the moment you plant that seed in the pot or in the garden, but when you're starting seeds ahead of time, it means from the time that plant is set out. So make sure when you see that pumpkin that says it has a 130-day growing season, you think, oh, well, that'll work, because I'm going to start it, you know, 1st of April. It's after it's set outside. So, good. New information for somebody.
Yeah.
And with the perennials, we talked about that briefly. You know, we are 4A, so make sure they're hardy in our area. That said, we all have little microclimates here and there. I mean, I've got some Zone 5 stuff that I'm doing okay with. It's close to the house or tucked in between buildings or things like that. So you can experiment, but don't necessarily expect that it will be a success. All right, so preparing for seed starting. Gathering the necessary materials. So first of all, the media for seed starting. There's probably a temptation to use some old germination mix that you had before and you planted something in it and it didn't germinate or it died out or whatever, or to use potting soil because you've got it, or use garden soil because it's cheap. This is one place, and I'm pretty frugal about things, but I'm not frugal where germix comes in, because it's a sterile media. You know, if you start using those other things, there may be pathogens in the soil. You know, it may be a heavy soil. You know, you want to nurture these little babies you're starting in as forgiving and positive environment as you can. So, getting a good germination mix, which is not the same as a potting soil. You all know that, right? It's much finer and often a little bit more expensive. A couple of germination mixes that are available locally are over at Hanson's. They've got something called Jolly Gardener, and it's they've been selling it for quite a few years now. It took the place of some of their Berger products that they had over there. And for a 2.8 cubic foot bag, and I talked to Beth yesterday, which is quite a bit. I mean, that's a bale about like this, and it's pretty compacted. So you can plant, I was going to calculate how many trays you could get out of 3 cubic feet, and I didn't, but you can plant a lot of seeds in a bale of germination mix. And they sell that for about $30. And again, it's called Jolly Gardener.
Does that have any
It does not.
fertilizer in it?
No. And I knew you were going there. And we will talk about that. And if we don't, remind me to talk about it. And I happened to be talking to Tyler this morning from Sullivan's, which is like right next to Triggs. And they're not open to sell a lot of gardening supplies right now. But that said, he's willing to sell their medium that they use, which is what used to be Sun something. Anyway, it's Sungrow now. And those are bigger bricks. Those are 3.6, I think, cubic feet. So that is a lot of germination mix. And he'll sell those for $60. So, and if they're not over in the Sullivan side, you can go into Tadpoles and say I sent you.
Is it okay to, like, what I didn't use last year, I kept it?
I do.
I didn't know if it
Yeah.
had to be fresh or not.
Yeah, with some that have like compost and micronutrients and stuff in, like your potting soils later, you may have lost a little bit of that. But germination mix, and as Mary Ann was alluding, has no fertilizers in it. Typically doesn't have much in the way of micronutrients or anything that retains moisture or anything like that. And it's, so it's pretty basic. It's just a sterile medium. I mean, if it's been sitting outside and got green, I might, tend to mix it up and use it in a potting soil or something, because once plants are established, they're a lot tougher. But, no, if I have some left, in fact, I've got a bag left right now that I'm going to start with. That's in the greenhouse and has been sitting there since last year, so I think you're fine with that. So, where are we here?
Question.
Yeah. Where is Hanson's?
Hanson's is out by Nicollet College in Rhinelander. And so, let me tell you the situation with Hanson's. It doesn't technically open for a couple months, but they are there. There's people there pretty well all day, Monday through Friday, and Beth, one of the owners, is there almost every afternoon. And anybody that wants to pick up things early can go out there, just go to the main office. And she's usually in and around the office or the perennial houses, but if you don't see anybody in the office and it's unlocked, you're welcome to go wander the greenhouses, find a body, and then they'll get you what you need. They also have bulk vermiculite in there, like big bags of vermiculite, fairly inexpensively. And we'll talk a little bit about starting your own. Actually, I don't know how to put that in this, but we can talk about starting your own. Oh yeah, it's on here. It's there. Yeah, so Hanson's is out there. Good people. Buying locally is always best when you can do it, and it's really nice to support these local businesses. Fertilizer. Mary Ann mentioned fertilizer, and do these potting or do these germination mixes have fertilizer in it? No, they don't. And a seed, just like an egg, and I like the egg analogy. That little embryo that's your will-be baby chick in an egg doesn't need to be fertilized in that egg. And a seed is the same way, I mean, basically you've got the seed casing on the outside, and germination is all about breaking that seed casing down, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But then you've got, it's just surrounded, the embryo in there, what will be the baby plant, is just surrounded by nutrients. So through germination and through the formation of the cotyledon seeds, or leaves, which are the baby leaves, the very first leaves, how they often look different than the leaves you get later, you don't need to fertilize. But once you start getting the permanent leaves, the regular leaves, that's when you have to start providing the extra nutrients. And so all of these germination mixes, or most of them, certainly all the ones that I use, don't have fertilizer. So you're going to have to, once you're trying to establish those seedlings, you're going to have to add fertilizer to them. Yeah, and I did put the do-it-yourself recipe on there, which is really pretty straightforward, because you've got something else you can get at Hanson's are bales of peat. And you just mix the peat and vermiculite, and you add a little bit of limestone to reduce the acidity of the peat. And that's a less expensive way to do it if you're doing quantities too. And it works just fine. Containers, what did I put on there about containers? I'm just reducing the single-use plastics. There's a gazillion ways you can get containers for plants, but there's so many things, especially if you're growing on a small scale, things you have around the house that just work great. I mean, is this a mini greenhouse or what? You poke some holes in the bottom, a few holes in the top. Actually, this is blueberries, it has holes in the bottom. Put a little germination mix in there. You've got a little mini greenhouse, you can vent it as you need to. It's there. Egg cartons, they're great. You've got all these little potting containers right in there. And with egg cartons, if they're not waxed and not plastic, you actually can rip them apart when the time comes and plant them. The only caution, and it's the same caution I would give you if you bought the little peat pots, which I don't recommend, is make sure nothing's above the surface of the soil because it wicks the moisture out and the roots are never able to get through the bottom. You look confused, you know what I'm saying?
Don't fill it up to the top. Is that what you're saying?
No, you can fill it fairly full, but when if you're planting these with your plants in there, you know, make sure that any of the paper is totally covered in soil. And then the other thing I'll do is they're usually started breaking down on their own by the time you put them in the ground. I just start gently ripping them apart and then they'll break down. Newspapers, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but news review, 3 columns, makes lengthwise, makes a perfect little pot for starting things. They look pretty fragile, but you put the germination mix in and you line them up side by side in some sort of a container, and they don't come apart. If you're artsy crafty, there's a million sites online that will tell you how to do origami ones or fancy square ones. But these, you can sit, you know, watch a movie and make 100 of them. So fast and easy. Again, being creative. Ice cream carton, just not the wax ones, or if you use the wax ones, which is fine because they won't come apart. Don't try and plant this because it won't break down. Talked about that. What do we have on there? What haven't I done? If you're using previously used pots and trays, make sure you clean them off well. Full disclosure, do I do it 100% of the time? No. But if there's any chance that it had, you know, seedlings in it that damped off or something like that, then it's really important. A lot of people don't like to use bleach, I get that. Just a 3% hydrogen peroxide you just sprayed it does as good a job. Soil blocking, I know last year I brought in a tub, I didn't have any mix made up. This is another, we talked about Elliot Coleman in the meeting. This was his baby, and you can get these things through Johnny's, a few other sites online. You mix up your medium, and it's not the same as germination mix, because germination mix tends to be pretty crumbly, and you need something that it's more clay-like, and then it'll stick together. And you wet it well, you put it in a tub, you just press these down, and then you can just shoot your cubes out through the bottom, line them up. This is really an effective way to start plants. And unlike the germination mix that we've been talking about, that doesn't have fertilizers, when you're seed starting with soil blocking, there's tons of nutrients in that little soil block and micronutrients. And if anyone is interested in that, I can give you more information. I have a couple recipes for making your own, or Johnny sells it's called their 512 organic mix, which works great, but by the time you pay for shipping, it gets a little pricey.
Kitty, I just read something about, for the seed starting, take a little bit bigger pot, like a 3-inch one instead of the little cell ones. Fill it half with the potting mix that has fertilizer in it, the other half with the seed starting. So by the time
The roots get
the roots will go down into the you don't have to transplant as many times then.
Well, fertilize as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try it with a few and see.
Yeah. No,
It takes up more room though, because you're
It
using
does.
bigger pots.
but less time if you're not potting up several times. Yeah.
So you're saying you have a recipe for the soil mix you use for the blockers?
Mhm.
I'd like to get that.
Yeah, I got it here, you take a picture of it if you want.
Okay.
I think, no, I'm pretty sure. All right. So factors affecting germination, and I know most of you know most of this, so I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it. So there's 4 factors affecting germination. 3 of them you read about and hear about all the time. The 4th one I've kind of added because it's really important, and I think it's something we often overlook. So moisture, the growing medium should be kept consistently moist to hydrate the seed, activating the enzymes important for the germination process. So basically, germination is just, what seeds need to break dormancy, to break that outer seed coating and to get going. And in terms of the moisture, not too dry, not too wet. And one of the ways you can test that is to just take a handful of your germination mix after you've watered it. If you can wring water out of it, it's too wet. But it should feel consistently moist all the way through. And one thing, and I can't remember what I put on my slides and what I didn't, but if it isn't on there, it's really helpful. The germ mix tends to be really light and powdery and fine. And so if you put your seed in and water it, it's not going to work very well. You're going to have, the medium is going to be floating to the top, your seed, there's no control over the depth. So what I usually do is I'll take a tub of some kind, and I mean, I'm usually planting quite a bit at a time, so I've got a wash tub in there, but you could do it with any size container, and really wet your germ mix before you even put it in your container.
Yep.
And I'll usually do it and even leave it overnight. And then by the next day, it's really absorbed the moisture well, and you're not dealing with dry germ mix, which is not fun. So anything else I wanted to say about that? We talked about soaking seeds. That was something I was going to go into. Heat. Temperature influences the rate of germination, with optimal ranges varying between seed types. Yes, it does. Read the seed packet. And your seed packet will usually tell you at what temperature things will germinate best. We were talking about perennials earlier and how, this would be a good year to start perennials if you get keen on planting seeds after we meet today. Most perennials really need some heat to germinate. And keep in mind, if it says germinates best at 70 degrees, that doesn't mean the ambient temperature in the room. It means the soil temperature. And there's usually inside a 5 to 10, I've even read sometimes 15-degree difference between the temperature in the room and the temperature of the soil. So if it says germinates best at 70 degrees and you don't want to set your growing environment at 80 degrees, what do? And a lot of people will use the heated mats. And you can get them in all different sizes and qualities, and I've seen them from a small one for like a single tray for like, $10, $15 to $100 for one that you can get 4 or 5 trays on with adjustable temperature. You usually don't need the adjustable temperature because you're just using that heat mat until you get germination. And then in most cases, you want to cool the soil down a little bit so you don't get just uncontrolled growth. Cooler temperatures, things usually will move slower. They'll germinate slower, they'll grow slower. But fast growth isn't necessarily what you're after anyway. Yeah.
Watch me, I'm a novice at this. I don't know anything about it. I'm back on moisture yet.
Okay.
On the plastic planters, the milk jugs, do you have to put water in there?
Yeah. You're talking about your
You have to water them.
your outdoor seeding of these. Again, you start with a in fact, you'll see I have a cloth under this one because it's still oozing out of the bottom. A well-moistened germination mix in there. And getting back to these for a minute too, I was thinking about your unheated greenhouse. And those of you that came in after the meeting, I apologize, but Nancy has an unheated greenhouse and she's just wondering, how to best utilize it. Alice was talking about, creating a mini climate within your greenhouse. This is exactly that. You might, some of these seeds that require stratification, which is the freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing that is required to break down that seed coating, might just do, I would try this in your greenhouse.
I ended up just starting all my seeds in my house.
Yep.
Under grow lights and the heated mat. It's and I could watch them every minute of the day.
Yes. Well, I suspect most of the people in this room will be looking at doing exactly that. You know, starting them in the house, but with some augmentation.
When you're talking about what temperature to plant it at, it reminded me of a thing I have to always tell people, because I like to grow some old-fashioned beans seeds, okay? And I tell them, that soil has to be 60 degrees. Otherwise, they'll get in there, they'll rot.
Yeah, well, and I keep forgetting we're having this tape. So the comment was keeping the soil temperature where it needs to be to germinate things. And Laurel was talking about direct seeding outside. And there's certain things like corn and beans and that if you're planting them outside, there's no point in doing it until the soil temperature is above 60 degrees. Because they'll either grow too slowly, they won't germinate at all, and you're really not gaining anything by planting them too soon.
There's charts out there. You can go online, get the chart if you're planting outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point, Marianne, is that we have so many resources online now. And you have to be careful because there's a lot of stuff, and every time I'm preparing something like this, I go online and you read something that's just not true. You know, or somebody that's just grown for the first year and they think they have all the answers, and they probably don't. So when I'm searching online, there's one thing I always do when I'm looking for things related to horticulture, is I will put my search in, whatever it is, and then at the very end I'll put EDU. And if you do search EDU, it will take you to the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Wisconsin, the University of Minnesota, Purdue. It will take you to all of these good horticulture sites that you can trust because it's research-based. You're not getting some 19-year-old who thinks that they suddenly figured out how to grow everything. Anyway, blah, blah. Enough on that. EDU. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion of water, or bottom watering?
We will get to that in a
Okay.
minute. Are we on water yet? Oh, we were on water. Okay. Yes, we were on water, and we missed it. We were talking about just the importance of moisture in the germination mix and how the seed casing needs that to break down. These seeds, a lot of them are pretty tiny, and we'll talk about light in a second, and a lot of them we're putting on top of the soil, on top of the growing medium. And you don't want to take a sprinkler can and hold it over that. And in fact, I think probably the next slide, nope, there it is. The water bottle, misting water bottle is probably one of your best friends, that or bottom watering. So you'll usually have your pots, whatever you're planting in some sort of a tray. And that tray, at least initially, you may want to have solid rather than have drainage in it. And then you can bottom water. You put your water there, and then the water will wick up into the soil. One caveat with that, though, is make sure you're checking that. You don't want to leave standing water in there for 2 or 3 days, because then you're just asking for fungus and a bunch of different problems. So the last thing with the factors affecting germination, how are we doing? Oh my goodness, this always happens, doesn't it? Did we talk about light? I can't even remember. No, we didn't. Light can also influence germination. Some plants require light to germinate. If you're doing natives and perennials, the majority of natives and perennials need light to germinate. And it makes sense with the natives because the natives are natives. They've been doing this themselves for thousands of years. So seeds drop to the ground, and it's in their best interest to need light to germinate because that's what they're going to have. Again, read the seed packet. It's going to tell you how deep to plant your seeds. General rule of thumb, if you're planting seeds that need to be covered, you're going to do it about twice the width of the seed in depth of the germination medium. The last thing, which is the one I wanted to mention, because it's something people often forget, is even as seeds, these little guys need oxygen because they breathe at a cellular level. And certainly once you're getting them in the germination mix, they need oxygen. And I've seen too many people planting direct seeding in the garden, and they're just pounding down that seed so that it's covered. And it's sort of a fine balance, because especially with those top planted seeds that need the light to germinate, they need to have contact with the growing mix. But because you don't want oxygen between them and the growing mix, because they need the moisture that's in there to break the seed casing. But you don't want to pack them in so hard that you know, you're burying them, or they're under the surface and they can't get oxygen. Planting seeds, when to start when, read the seed packet, here it is again. Most common mistake is starting too early. And as soon as we start planting seeds, we all want to get our hands dirty and stick things in. And especially if you're growing in the house by window light and you don't have, you know, you were talking about having grow lights, having a heating mat. If the conditions aren't ideal, the longer the plant has to stay in those less than optimal conditions, the more likely you are to have problems. And I mean, the main problem you have growing seeds in the house for a lot of people is they just get real leggy, right? You know, you probably all had that experience trying to grow tomatoes in your window. And especially starting early in the spring, because the earlier we are in the spring, the less light there is during the course of the day, and the less effective it is. If you were starting things in late April, you probably wouldn't have as many problems as you'll have starting them in February. That we covered. Planting seeds, and this kind of goes into the planting seeds. We talked about the depth requirement. Spacing seeds. My best friend when I'm planting little seeds is a toothpick. And you see other people nodding their heads. Other people have used this trick. Actually, there's two things that I always keep in my planting, transplanting area. One is a toothpick and one is a bamboo skewer, and we'll get to the bamboo skewer in a minute. But the toothpick, you have tiny little seeds, and you know, no matter how you try and space those seeds, if you're doing that with your fingers, you're just gonna, you know, they're just going to be really jammed in there, and you're gonna have far too many seeds. But just a damp toothpick, you can just pick up the smallest seed and put it exactly where you want it, and it works great. Yes, and that has to do with the spacing seeds. We'll move on from there, I think. Label your trays. Label your pots. Even though you think that you can possibly forget what's in there, you will. And it's not just when you get to be over 70. It just happens. And more than just labeling the seeds, label them multiply in different kinds of pens. I mean, a pencil on a tongue depressor works great, you know, or you can get special plant markers that you can use. But even the indelible markers, I find, given time and moisture and sunlight, they really fade. So label them well. We talked about watering and either bottom watering or using the spray, so we won't go into that again. Once you have your plants in your tray or your containers, you want to cover them with something, because your goal at this point is to keep it fairly humid in there. And I say fairly because you have to monitor it and make sure that, especially once the plant starts coming up, you don't have too much moisture in there. But you can use a clear lid if you're using something like this, something like this. These all have covers, and it's keeping that humidity in there. But be careful, because especially if you're like in your greenhouse and you've got the light coming in, you can cook the seeds, even in a window. It heats up so much with that lid on. Make sure, especially if it's in the sunlight of any kind, that you have ventilation, so you can let that hot air out of there. But, so be careful with that. And just as you're watching them, keep those 4 germination factors in mind, and and you should do fine. And monitor, whoops, wrong way. Okay, after germination, provide 12 to 16 hours of bright light per day. And again, we talked about how if you're starting them early, even in a west window or a south window, you may not have enough light. Grow lights, you can get relatively cheap fluorescents. A lot of people say 2 cool bulbs is all you really need. When I used to use fluorescents, I would either get balanced ones or I'd use 1 cool and 1 warm, so I'd have the whole spectrum. What you're trying to achieve is 5,700 degrees Kelvin, which is the temperature of the sun. And so by mixing those fluorescents, you're starting to approach that, and that's what your plants need. More and more people are going to LED lights now. They're very cheap to operate. And I shouldn't say they're very cheap. They're affordable in most cases. Nothing is very cheap anymore. But they have some advantages over the fluorescents. If you get the growing LEDs, they're balanced at 5,700 degrees, so there's not as much guesswork involved. Typically, you put them 4 to 6 inches over your baby plants. Just remember, as your plants grow, progressively raise the light and just sort of keep that distance all the way up. We talked a little bit about fertilizer and how you need to fertilize once the first leaves appear. Where fertilizer is concerned, more is not better. And so for baby plants, you probably, well, in my opinion, want to use a very mild solution of liquid fertilizer. And there's a lot of them out there, and I use it probably more frequently, but at like 1/2 to 1/4 of what the container may tell you to use. And one that I like that I use a lot is Neptune's Harvest, which is available online directly from the place in Maine that makes it. It's a fish harvesting place out there that sells Neptune's Harvest. It's organic. They've got a couple of different blends. And if you're looking at the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium levels, the NPK, what your plants need when they're just starting to grow is they need green growth and they need root growth. So you want the two, you want the N and the K. And you want nitrogen because that promotes the green growth, and potassium for good root growth and stems and general growth. Phosphorus is important too, but it's more important later for flowering and fruit bearing and things like that. So that is what I would emphasize there. Don't fertilize stressed seedlings. Fix the problem instead. And you can tell if your seedlings aren't looking great. If it looks droopy, it needs water. If it looks leggy, it needs light. Brown leaves, it got burned, either by sunlight or fertilizer, something like that. Those leaves, when they're brown, if it's not too bad, they'll usually drop and you'll get a new leaf, so it's not hopeless. But if the leaves aren't brown and just start dropping off, or if you have a stem coming up and all of a sudden it's getting thinner and thinner and thinner at some point, toss it. Because it's damping off, and that's a fungal infection. You're much more likely to get that if you're using garden soil, old potting soil from 3 years ago, things like that. If you're using a sterile mix and you're being fairly religious about having airflow and not too much humidity, then you won't have nearly as much problem with damping off. But if you have a tray that's damped off, get those plants out of your greenhouse, out of your house. There's no coming back. You know, you may have nurtured it for a month, but you really don't want it there. So, yeah.
They talk about putting cinnamon on it.
As a preventive.
And that's true.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've read that too, I don't know.
We did it at Nicolay when we had the greenhouse there.
On all your seedling trays or
Yeah.
broadly?
You just sprinkle it on top?
Yeah,
On the soil?
And that was for damping off.
yeah, to prevent that.
Okay, yeah, that'll help. The other thing that'll really help it, if you've got your plastic over your seeds, or especially if they're starting to come up, and you're starting to get the germination, is just take the plastic off for a little bit and just let them dry out, because it's those really ultra damp conditions that really promote that. And while we're talking about that, let's talk a little bit about watering. I can't remember if I put that on the slide or not, but don't feel like you have to water your seedlings every day, because that's going to lead to fungal problems and different things too. The soil should actually be drying out before you add more water to it. And it's always better, as long as they're not droopy from lack of water, it's always better to err on the side of frugal watering rather than overwatering. Transplanting seedlings and not planting individual containers, thin or transplant once the seedlings have 1 or 2 sets of true leaves and before they become root bound. Let me talk a little bit about thinning, because as much as we may try with our toothpick, often you're going to get, 5 plants in the space that you intended for 1. You can, and I have, especially if I don't have a lot of them, you can, when you're transplanting, you can try and take them out and squeeze out every separate little plant. It's way better for the existing plant if you just put your big girl pants on and take a scissors and cut out the ones that are crowding the plant that you want to keep. Because then you're not disturbing that root system. The roots are very tender at this time. And when we're talking about tenderness and transplanting, this is the other time, this is where the bamboo skewer comes in, is just kind of getting in and loosening that plant up a little bit. And one of the things we may or may not have talked about with containers, but containers, one of the things they need to be is flexible enough that you can kind of loosen up the plants. But the skewers, you can kind of dig them out of there too, a little bit. Handling gently. There's a real temptation when you're transplanting, even if you've loosened the roots down there, to grab the plant by the stem and move it. The stem is probably the most fragile part of that plant. If you can grab it by the leaves, and you're not going to transplant until you've got at least 1 full set, more likely 2 or 3 sets of real leaves. Those leaves are tough. Loosen it up and then pick it up by the leaves rather than by the stem, and you're less likely to damage it. What else do I have on there? Consider adding micronutrients, worm castings. Marianne was talking about worm castings before. Great stuff to add to your potting mix. So what you're doing when you're transplanting is you're moving your plants from this germination mix into a potting mix. And the potting mix is coarser, it's often less expensive, and a lot of times, even as you buy it, it'll have a charge of fertilizer in it, both the organic and the non-organic potting mixes. So that's something to concentrate on when you're getting your potting mix, and see what's in it in terms of nutrients. And there's some that also have micronutrients in them now. So just read the label and see what you find there. And I do say that up there. Sorry about that. For most seedlings planted at the same depth that they were growing, and that applies to like 95% of anything you're going to transplant. And I mentioned the tomato exception, because I think a lot of times when you're transplanting tomatoes, you'll get the first set of leaves, and then a second set of leaves, and a third set of leaves. Each of those junctures where the leaves come into the stem can potentially root. And especially those of us that end up, despite our best intentions, planting tomatoes in March, tend to get tomatoes, not looking at you, Marianne, but we both do it, tend to get plants that are somewhat leggy. Tomatoes, I mean, if you've got a tomato plant this big that you're transplanting, you can essentially lay it on its side and just leave this much above the soil, and it'll develop roots along, you pinch off the leaves that you're leaving there, but it'll develop roots along every one of those junctures, and you're gonna get a really strong plant with a really good root system. So that's my tomato lecture. Potting soils, again, all of the local greenhouses have them. I can't speak to the big box stores because I try to support local business as much as I can, but I know that Sullivan's in town will have potting soil in another 6 weeks or so. They don't have it yet, but we don't really need it yet unless we're transplanting things. Hanson's carries the Berger BM7, which is really good, or the OM6, that's their organic potting soil, and that's a great soil. Okay, keep losing this thing. Hardening off seedlings. This is a step you don't want to forget. It's the way we're transitioning our seedlings, and by this time, in a lot of cases, transplants outside. And if you just take them, out of your window, out from under the grow lights, out of the greenhouse, and stick them outside, where they suddenly have, wind and rain and sunshine and all this stuff happening, it's really going to set them back. It'll take you 2 weeks of your time, maybe a week and a half. Start by taking them out for a few hours a day, putting them somewhere fairly sheltered. I don't start them in the sun. I gradually introduce sun to them. And it is a bit of a pain. You can see that my woman there has some in her wheelbarrow. That's what she's doing.
My father-in-law used to put a gentle fan on.
And for whatever reason, when I was that was in the back of my mind, when I was talking about back in the, just supporting seedlings, one thing that I always do in my greenhouse is I always have oscillating fans. I've got overhead fans too that sort of help adjust the heat, but the oscillating fans, I mean, they're just cranking on those plants. And I think that really helps with the hardening off before you ever start the actual hardening off process. And you can start that with tiny little seedlings, don't blast them with 80.
When you were like about so big.
Yeah.
Getting them ready to be outside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it just gives you much stronger stems, and they are much, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that may have been in the slides, I'm not sure.
I was just thinking when you were saying hardening off, this is not part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, initially move to a shady location out of the wind, and then gradually introduce those periods of sunlight and increase the exposure. And it's well worth doing. So then when do you transplant it into the garden or outdoor containers? So when you're actually transplanting, try and do it on a cloudy day rather than a sunny day. And just as friendly a day as possible. I like transplanting in the evening whenever possible. And it's just because then they don't have that day of just blasting conditions out there. I also tend to add, and I didn't talk much about applications of the liquid fertilizers, but I do those regularly as the plants are growing, but also right as I'm transplanting. I'll do a very mild dose of a liquid fertilizer. And when you're fertilizing, I'm sort of jumping all over here and I apologize, don't put that liquid fertilizer on dry soil. I usually make sure the soil is nice and damp, put it on, and then probably water them again the next day to sort of work it in there. And the other nice thing about the liquid fertilizers at those mild concentrations is they're a great foliar fertilizer. And I don't know how many of you have ever done foliar fertilizer, but in your spray can, you just spray the fertilizer on the leaves. And if you've got a nice, very mild concentration of an organic fertilizer, you're not going to burn the leaves. If you don't do it when they're sitting in the sun. And again, it's something I typically do either early in the morning or later in the day. Later in the day, of course, you potentially are introducing moisture to the leaves, which can lead to fungus. So I think that probably early morning is probably the optimal time to do that. So when you're transplanting it, and this is something people often forget, and I see people forgetting it when they're buying plants from the nursery too, is remember those roots have been living in a small container, and a lot of times, despite our best efforts, they're going to get a little bit root bound. You know, so you're going to have these compacted roots in there. Really loosen those up, and this is another place for your bamboo skewer to kind of work it in and loosen the roots a bit, because you don't want them to continue to grow in this root ball. Once they're out and transplanted, you want those roots to go out where they need to be. And which also is saying something about the conditions you're planting them in. You know, make sure the soil that you're moving them into is really well loosened. And so that they have, again, as friendly an environment as they can to go out. Proper spacing, we talked about that before with when starting our seeds. Make sure, you know, it may be a tiny little plant now, but it's not going to be in a month. So again, read the seed packet and make sure that you're spacing them at the recommended amounts. And there's different things that you can do more intensive planting, but I think that's out of the scope of this talk. We won't go there right now. And again, firm the soil around your seedlings when you're planting them out, because you want to remove any pockets of air that are down there. Again, so those roots don't die off when they're going into some air pocket, but instead are spreading out into the soil. Okay, what plants can go into the garden when? Cool weather plants, warm weather plants. So we talked a little bit about this. I won't go into a ton of detail. But when we're talking about what plants can we start early, even though you may not want your cabbages to spend, 2 months under grow lights or in your window, keep in mind that they can be planted long before the last frost. So cabbages, onions, actually any of the brassicas, broccoli, kale, any of those things, you can be planting even up here in late April, early May. Onions too, yeah. And we talked a little bit about the frost stuff, so I won't go into that. And Will had brought up earlier about the soil temperatures, and this is where I was going to go into it. Warm weather plants, don't even try and put them out until the soil temperature is like 60 to 70 degrees. Oh yeah, I thought I had written that wrong, but I haven't. That's what we wanted to say. So, in a quick wrap up, and we can do the seed starting. I'll be around to talk to anybody and any questions or anything you have. Kind of pulling it together a little bit. The top 10 seed starting tips that I have on there. Have fun. Seeds really, they're made to grow. They want to grow. Don't take it too seriously or take yourself too seriously. Label your seedlings right away. I think we covered that well. Don't go cheap with the starter mix. Reuse, reduce, single-use plastics always in everything you do. Have a plan for lights and water. If you're starting now inside, you're going to need a plan for light. Because I don't think there's anything you can start from seed right now in the house that is going to do well without some sort of supplementary light.
I like to use my end cable lights,
There you are.
And
you can get light bulbs that are grow light bulbs to go into your regular lamps. That's a good point.
because you're right there and you can see it all the time. And
Yep. Start at the right time, don't rush the season, thin and space for healthy plants, we talked about that, and the scissors technique. Adjusting the lighting as the plants grow, remember to harden off, and read the seed packet. Because there is a lot of information there, and online, just do that EDU thing. So, any questions or comments or anything anybody has? Yes, sir.
I know you mentioned mixing your seeds.
Yes.
What's your opinion on tannic acid?
You know, I've never used tanning
I
gas.
never have either, I've never nicked my seeds, that's why I'm asking.
I mean, the goal is to break down the seed casing on some of those really hard ones. And, you know, another one would be like Baptisia or something if you're doing natives. I mean, it is hard to break through those seeds. That's why you're stratifying a lot of that stuff. I don't know. Have you done a search online, EDU?
No, I've read this stuff and then just never did it.
Yeah, I don't know. Anybody else have any experience with that?
Well, I've read about hydrogen peroxide
Right.
too,
Yeah,
soaking them in that.
yeah. Yeah.
I've never tried it.
No. I mean, I find like, a lot of times the seeds with the really hard seed casings tend to be bigger seeds, you know? And soaking them in water, then running them through a colander, and then putting them in wet paper towel or wet newspaper or something in the dark. And I'm thinking of sweet peas and things like that. And usually in 4 or 5 days, you know, they're gonna, just a lot of them. I've had sometimes 3 weeks before they actually come popping through. But
I was thinking of beets. I think I got something that said I was supposed to put them in a bag with a rolling pin.
with what, beets?
A rolling pin.
Yeah, trying to, you know.
Break the shell.
What do you
Yes,
do
you
with beets?
could try it.
Laura, well, I just,
What do you do with beets?
it was because of the seeds are so, you know, it's hard. You can soak them, but they were suggesting putting them like in a plastic bag and taking a rolling pin, trying to crack them.
Breaking, crack them.
Crack them a little bit?
I got one.
So that they had
Out
to
of this.
Every day. I have
Well, I know you have. You know, I need some.
I haven't tried it. Anybody crack seeds with rolling pins? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Happy
thank
rolling
you.
pin. And my contact information is on the back of this.
Yes.
So if anybody has any questions, then feel free to reach out.